This IFL TV. Wow. Whoa, you went full on whatever, didn't you?
Because the mask is slipping. It's all bullshit. And you want to accuse, you're now accusing us of blocking the ambulance to let you go to hospital. You will see an apology from Chris Eubank Jr. soon, because that, people don't even really, he don't even know that on the night there's a complete log from the paramedics, the ambulances, the British Boxing Board of Control about what happens. I mean, firstly, his contract's not even with Matchroom, it's with Turkey Al Sheikh and Seller. But that's okay, and that's why I wanted to hear him repeat it up there. Because what he's trying to do is bluff the public. You know, all this thing about, oh yeah, you know, I've grannies and kids and what they did to me on the way. There was nothing. And that took it, for me, the mask slipped tonight. And as for not letting me just say a few words about Ricky Hatton, when he knew I was trying to talk about Ricky Hatton, honestly, I can't have this bloke. And that's why tonight, it was just different. It was different. And I don't like the whole victim playing all the time from Chris Eubank Jr. Oh, this happened, that happened. They never let Billy Joe Saunders in the dressing room to look at the gloves. You should be allowed to go in. They stopped him from going in. So, and also, like, yeah, I was really disgusted with what he did up there today. And it's Eubank saying, what are you going to do, sue me? Yeah. Because when you talk about my company like that and make accusations like that, you will pay. And I don't want to go all Frank Warren, but Frank Warren's right. You can't say things like that and try and convince the public about lies and bullshit about what happened. So that will be dealt with.
Speaking to Eddie and afterwards, he said that he will be taking action on this if you weren't going to issue an apology over this. Can you make a comment on that, please?
What a scumbag. The guy, I'm stuck in an ambulance for 20 minutes attached to an oxygen tank. And now I've got to apologize for telling everyone about it. Oh, Jesus, the balls on this guy. Who else would benefit? Who else would have a reason to stop those gates from opening for 20 minutes, knowing I'm in the back of this ambulance, needing to go to hospital? I only have a few enemies. Conor Benn, Matchroom, Eddie Hearn, Frank Smith, Robert Smith showed himself to be an enemy of mine after all the things he did leading up to this fight. And I think he is in the back pocket of Matchroom and Eddie Hearn. So one of them guys did it. Who else would have stopped that barrier from raising? I have to address these things because they could happen to somebody else. You know, like I said, if it was a serious injury, if I had a bleed on the brain, if something was going wrong with my respiratory system, that 20 minutes could have been the difference between life and death.
The battle of Eddie and Chris. Yes, it continues, as you guys heard and seen. Eddie's waffling, Chris's wincing. We have a standoff. You know, Eddie, he's trying to sue Chris Eubank Jr. for accusing him of holding up the ambulance of the first fight. And, you know, Eddie's very upset. Like I told you guys earlier, you know, it takes a lot to get Eddie pissed off, whereas Frank Warren is more of a no-nonsense. He's like, oh, you're talking about me, I'm going to sue you, right? And Eddie now is taking that Frank Warren route, you know, and Chris in his rebuttal, you know, saying that, hey, you know, who else is going to do it, you know, and let me counterpunch, okay? I think that when you're dealing with Eddie, you know, Eddie saying that, you know, why wasn't Billy Joe Saunders in there? I think that Billy Joe Saunders, that wasn't a necessity for him to come in there. You know, and you know he doesn't get along with Chris Eubank Jr., so why would Jr. want him in there? They don't get along. They have never got along. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I could, you know, so I can understand Chris on that. But as far as the allegations, Eddie Hearn talking of, you know, suing and all that. I think it's important to maintain a good reputation, and for him to be accused of that, knowing that he didn't do it, if that wasn't his fault, I would be taking legal action as well. You know what I mean? But I think the thing is, Eddie Hearn has been so primed or made a reputation for not doing those type of things, like Frank Warren said he was going to do, like Oscar said he was going to do to Canelo and things like that. So, I think that's his limit. You know what I mean? Because we've seen Eddie pissed off before. I haven't seen Eddie this mad probably since the Luis Ortiz, Jim Jimenez, the manager of Luis Ortiz issue, when they said that, Eddie lowballed him. And that pissed Eddie off. And this has been like 6-7 years ago, right? So I see him in a different, well, he's madder now. He's in the red. So this is an example when Eddie gets pissed off, and, he has the opportunity to sue, and I think he'll do that. Whereas Chris is stating that, hey, I wasn't in a life-threatening situation, but I am exposing the people that I think that did it, and who else would do it? Well, I don't know if it was that deep, but then this is boxing. You don't know what could have transpired. We don't know. We don't know if it was Eddie or not. We don't know if it was a situation where that was kind of like the only thing left that they had control over is who left the stadium. I wouldn't imagine, though. I don't want to say Eddie was in charge of that. I don't even want to say he has the power to do that. Someone, entering and leaving the stadium, especially ambulances, because ambulances have special privileges to leave and go places. But maybe that night it was something that prevented them. Somebody had a traffic jam, or some kind of security guard had a hard on or something. You know what I mean? He had some kind of, superiority complex or something like that. I don't know. Maybe it was something like that happened besides blaming Eddie. But if it wasn't Eddie, and Eddie has right to sue, he has every right to do that. You know what I mean? Now, speaking of Chris, though, I don't think Chris gives a damn. I think Chris, calling them scumbags, first of all, that really ruffled the feathers of guys like Frank Warren. And, it affected Eddie Hearn. I just think I don't think that done it, But yeah, I don't think Chris cares. I don't think he cares. I don't think that those fines bother him, because they're going to make a whole lot of money, and that's just more deductions, from Chris to give back to Eddie Hearn. And I think he's accustomed to that, because the irony of it is that's why Chris Eubank Jr. said that he was a scumbag, him and Eddie and a lot of other ones anyway, because they were suing him and doing things like that, like deducting. So Eddie going out of his way to sue Chris Eubank because of his words just means that Eddie Hearn might in fact be exactly what Chris Eubank Jr. called him, a scumbag. You see what I mean? So it still goes back to the same thing. Like, oh, I'm not this. Oh, I'm not a scumbag. Or I'm not, or I don't do these things. But you're doing them. So it's a lot, though. And as far as the Ricky Hatton thing, we don't know if Eddie was going to actually talk about Ricky Hatton before he started opening his mouth. You know what I mean? So we don't know what Eddie was going to talk about. He might have just changed what he was saying to the Ricky Hatton bid just to say Chris Eubank cut him off at a time where it was very disrespectful to cut him off. Eddie knows the game, so it's hard to tell. Only Eddie and God above knows what Eddie was going to say. Now, if he was going to say that and Chris cut him off doing his, same old song and dance, well, yeah, that would be pretty shitty. But then we don't know what Eddie was going to say, because, Eddie is Eddie. He could have just said, hey, I'm talking about Chris Eubank Ricky Hatton, shut up, Chris Eubank, so I can continue to give my respects for him. But to be fair, people, he had already mentioned Ricky Hatton before. You know what I mean? So a lot of people pointed that out when this conference did take place. But yeah, the war is on and raging. You guys tell me what you think of the war between Eddie and Chris. Of course, please subscribe. And you guys been Counterpunch. Peace.